My name is Hazelmillichamp and this is the Light on Leeds podcast. This week's guest is Bryn Mostyn. He is the team leader at Leeds Community Gambling Servcie. We talk about the impacts of gambling on your time as well as your finances, how he and his team are working to reduce the stigma of seeking help, the effects on loved ones and the impact on mental well-being. Bryn is a brilliant guest. He's very knowledgeable and he has lots of advice on how to seek help and support. Have a listen. On this episode of the Light on Leeds podcast, I have Bryn Mostyn come to speak to me. Hello, Bryn.
Hello, Hazel. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. So, Bryn, you are a team leader at Leeds Community Gambling Servcie. Can you explain a little bit about what that service is?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you. So our main aim is to provide access to support for anybody in the city who feels there are issues relating to gambling, specifically if they've been impacted by problematic gambling or gambling of any type, really. We're key to point out this isn't just the people who are gambling. We do support anyone affected by gambling, so family members, loved ones, or anybody close to the person gambling that has been hugely impacted by it. And we offer free confidential sessions to anybody wanting to access support. They're very much led by the individual that comes to speak to us. There isn't like a set program they have to complete if someone just wants to have a couple of chats with us or a prolonged series of sessions in which they really want to work through the concerns that they've got. That's how it works. And we're doing that remotely still, so over like Zoom or over the phone. But we are starting to do more face-to-face sessions as well across a few locations across the city, so we can see people in the city centre. And at present, we have a space in Hare Hills and one in Middleton, and we're just about sorting something out in the west of the city as well. So that's one of the main aspects of the service. The other aspect of the service, which I tend to cover more, is what we call our training and engagement. So we offer free training to services across Leeds around gambling harms, how to support people into accessing support, and then a bit about what we do, a bit more in-depth work about what we do. Again, it's free training to services across Leeds that wants to engage with that. And then we also do a lot of community engagement work. So that could be a stall in a shopping centre, that could be doing something around a sporting event, getting into supermarkets or things somewhere like that. A lot of work in the universities with the unions, just to, again, try and have that discussion with people about gambling, not necessarily talking about really significant problems in the public space, but just an opportunity for people to ask us questions and have a bit more clarity, and we can just have a bit of an informal chat about what people think of gambling as an activity, and then where we can offer some harm reduction and ways to keep safe.
Do you think, Bryn, that people have different sort of definitions of what they think gambling is? So they've kind of been engaged in something that really, on paper is gambling, but they haven't sort of seen it that way.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Hazel, and I'm glad you said that, because absolutely, I think there can be, there is a fair amount of perhaps stereotypes and generalizations when it comes to gambling. So particularly with someone who's got a gambling problem, in inverted commas, it's someone perhaps that would be historically be sat in a bookmakers all day, or sat in a casino from open to close. We do speak to people who access bookmakers, who access casinos, but there's so much gambling opportunities available, particularly online and on smartphone apps and things like that often goes hidden, and can be quite difficult for other people to detect. But more to your point and more to your question, there's things like the lottery, scratch cards, that technically is gambling. I know we wouldn't necessarily class it as that, and there's there are initiatives that lottery money funds, so people perhaps have a different opinion on it. But we certainly speak to a fair few people who come to us, particularly for scratch cards, who feel that they have a real desire and almost a compulsion to buy scratch cards quite frequently and spend a significant amount of their income on scratch cards in particular. And then more recently, in the last year, 18 months or so to a year, we're seeing more things like people investing in cryptocurrency, in trading apps and stocks and shares and things like that. It's becoming a lot more accessible, again, online and on smartphones. And I think it's a bit of some people can see it as a way of making money, and people obviously do. It's I'm not saying that's not the case, but we have seen people have come to us and said it's something that they're having difficulty in managing. So yeah, absolutely, we'll support anyone with that as well. The last one I'll probably say, just on the topic, and when it comes to technically defining what gambling is, it gets a bit of a grey area. But there's things like video games, more specifically loot boxes or in-app purchases on mobile phone games.
Mm-hmm.
We have had individuals who've said that this is something that they feel they're losing an element of control on how much they're spending on it, or the feeling they're getting, that sort of buzz from perhaps getting from a loot box on a game the item that they want. So a good example would be FIFA, a player from the packs that they want. I know FIFA has changed a lot of it recently, but that same feeling of you're spending money, you don't know what the outcome's going to be, and that rush of excitement when you get what you want is very similar to traditional, if you like, gambling avenues. So yeah, we will speak to anybody who feels they've got a concern around risking money for an unknown reward.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the cryptocurrency thing, because it's become such a huge thing in the media, and I wondered as well, if do you sort of know? I imagine that you do. Do you notice over times when people are under financial stress, like at the minute, everybody's worrying about their energy bills and the general price of living? Do you find that at those points people get into gambling more because they're looking for a way out?
Absolutely, and there's always the potential for it. I think the tricky thing is it's trying to deter it away from seeing it as a get rich quick opportunity.
Yeah.
That's the key thing, really. I think with things like crypto, I mean, we're currently in the process of, even now, constantly trying to build our skill set and our knowledge of things like cryptocurrency, because you're absolutely right, it's a big thing in the media. But I don't think it's unfair to say that most people, if you were to pluck someone at random from the street and ask them to explain in detail what it is and how it works,
yeah,
they'll probably have a bit of difficulty doing so. Which is, okay for someone that's not engaging with it. That's fine if they don't know too many details. But if someone's investing quite a lot of their own money into it, and it doesn't go anywhere, or they lose that money, that's when it can become a real concern. And I guess generally as well, gambling overall, it's one of, as I mentioned before, one of the key things we want to do is, if somebody comes to us and say they don't want to stop gambling, the least we want to try and do is provide as much information as somebody as we possibly can to make sure that person is safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well with the cryptocurrency thing, I think because the way it's kind of portrayed is that it's a way of getting into kind of markets, and it's like a stock exchange, really.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of legitimizes it in people's minds, even though they might not understand, and who does, how stock markets work, and that you can make money and you can lose money. And I think that's one of the examples where people don't see it as gambling, which it is. The stock market itself is also a form of gambling, but it kind of makes it feel like in people's minds that it's a legitimate thing to get involved with.
Definitely. I think we can get, and understandably so, get hung up on the term gambling, because the individuals that have come to us, you're absolutely right, they've said words to the effect of, or I'm not a gambler, or it's not gambling. And I think the point is this activity, is it causing issues for you where you're struggling to maintain an element of control, or you may have lost a lot of money and feel then that you need to chase that money again, so invest more money to try and gain back the money that you've lost? Is it impacting on the amount of time you're spending on it? Is it causing you causing you to be mentally unwell, or some kind of emotional distress? Is it impacting on your relationships, the family? You can avoid the specific word gambling, but the impacts that it's having would very much be the sort of things that we'd want to speak to people about, and to try and help them with it, and give them the support that perhaps may be needed.
Yeah, definitely. And have you noticed that it's starting to affect people younger? Because something that I've noticed that has been worrying me is I play a lot of like just silly games that you play on your phone that really, are aimed at children. And occasionally ads come on them. And there's particularly pernicious ads, I think, where they show a couple of teenage girls, they're playing a game, and then you can just see ping, 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 and it's like a PayPal notification, and they see all this money going into their account. And I thought, obviously I'm an adult and I'm looking at that, and I understand that can't be, like, anything that's too good to be true on the internet is too good to be true. But if I was a child, and also, I think sometimes parents perhaps don't have a hold on what their children are seeing, and really on an app that's just a nice game that's aimed at children, it really worries me that's kids are seeing that and may have an idea that that's a really great way to make money, and it must be true because it's on this game for children.
Yeah, absolutely. You worry that it can devalue the importance or significance of money. If you just tap a button on your screen and then you get more of the items that you want for the game, or you get an opportunity to win more money, particularly if we're talking about children and it's not, they won't have a bank account that's connected to that game or the account. It's just a case of tapping a button, confirming it, and going and it being sent through. So yeah, absolutely. One of the things I would always encourage anybody to listening to this who is, parent of children to have a look at, your security settings and privacy settings and things like that on your phone, just to make sure that it needs to be yourself that it verifies any kind of transaction. We've talked about phones. This is for a few years now, been the case with game consoles as well. So on the Xbox or the PlayStation, lots of games have the opportunity to buy extra content, often a lot of the time like cosmetic type things, which can improve the experience of the game, but they cost money. And I used to, before working here, I used to work for a drug treatment service and for our young persons team, so work with young people there, and quite a few families would mention to me about, my son or my daughter, they've spent hundreds of pounds on a video game. I didn't even realise the card was connected to it. And that's not to level blame at anybody. It's it's if a young person perhaps hasn't isn't aware of kind of the impacts of these things, or thinks they can just stick a credit card on their Xbox and then just buy more stuff for the game as and when they need, and then the parent is aware that's being done, that's when the bank statement comes through that could be in for quite a shock. But I think more significantly, just on that point of devaluing the significance of money, it can build in those crucial stages of development, it builds this idea of that kind of get rich quick or taking chance, but also similar to any kind of addictive behavior, really, the rush and the sense of feeling that can come from winning. Whenever we win something on a game, on a phone game, a game on a console, or on a fruit machine, it normally comes with bright lights, bright sounds, celebration, things are really good. That all sends triggers to the brain that this is something we want to keep doing, that sense of reward. And if that's happening at a younger age, there's potentially more risk of that person wanting to continue to chase that sort of feeling as they get older.
Of course, yeah, definitely. And did you find that during COVID, did that sort of make the problem worse? Because, a lot of people were out of work, and lost all their streams of income, and they sat at home for longer. Did you find that had an impact?
Yeah, definitely. I think the impact, gambling can really occur when we to perhaps touch on an earlier question you mentioned, Hazel. Gambling can occur when perhaps there's financial hardship, or somebody will see gambling as a means of making money. And we always try and deter that from people. It's essentially this sense of it being a game, or if some people, for those who gamble and responsible, or they're safe, with their gambling, and can set limits, then it is a form of entertainment, and it's about trying to maintain that sort of attitude towards it, that it's not a means of making money, just because of the huge element of risk and chance that's involved. That's a real key indicator. But the other thing I was going to say was isolation, boredom, feeling like nothing to do. If someone was on furlough during COVID, or if unfortunately they had lost their job and they had a lot more time on their hands, you add these two things together, then the chances of problematic gambling, is going to increase. It's something that we're particularly mindful of. So as COVID continued on, it was then seeing that knock-on effect, if you like, of COVID in lockdown rather has been in effect for a few months, and then it was starting to see perhaps more prevalence of people coming through, because generally most people that access service or want to speak to us about their gambling is when the issue has really taken hold and it's caused quite a lot of consequence. So it's we then see that knock-on effect.
Yeah, of course. Are you able to? I mean, I imagine it's different for different people, but as kind of like a rule of thumb, are you able to kind of say, like you said earlier, gambling can be a form of entertainment. Are there sort of warning signs that people can look out for? Because sometimes when you're in a situation, it's very difficult to identify it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And are there signs that people can look at where you can distinguish between when it's moved from being entertainment into being a problem?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good question, Hazel, not just for the person gambling, but anybody else who might be, closely affected by it. So family members, loved ones, and people like that. I think a real key thing is it becoming a bit more withdrawn, not just from other people, but from usual activities or hobbies. So like not wanting to go out with friends as much or spend time on perhaps activities outside of work that they would usually do so, potentially wanting to stay at home more, and then being, as they're more withdrawn from other things, becoming more focused on, say, like their phone, or their tablet or computer or whatever it is that they're choosing to use to place a bet or to gamble.
Yeah.
It's things like that. So just noticing that being on their phone more, that's and being withdrawn from other events. That's the key thing. A lot of people that spoke to us about, when we've worked with a lot of people, and we have people at GamCare who have lived experience of gambling, and they've talked a lot about this, about kind of withdrawing away from other people. So that's a real key indicator. Another one could be, just general changes in mood that are quite noticeable, particularly looking quite worried or suddenly being quite agitated or quite snappy, probably because they've lost a significant amount of money, or they had a really high stake that they've then lost. And it's going to impact on somebody's mood if you've lost, say, hundreds of thousands of pounds in the space of half an hour, and nobody else is aware, and you can't really talk to anybody else about it because nobody knows. The amount of internal pressure that puts on a person is really high.
Yeah.
So sudden mood changes and things like that. With mood changes, you can look at perhaps issues with sleeping. So someone might be, if they're chasing losses or losing quite a lot of money, it's understandable that they're probably going to have a bit of difficulty sleeping due to the amount of anxiety or worry. But not only that, it's again, if we look at things like mobile phones, maybe not sleeping because on their phone so much before going to bed, or getting up in the night, perhaps to see to young children, or get a drink or use a toilet, and use that opportunity to have look at their phone, which can really disrupt sleeping patterns and things like that. And the last couple I'll say, really, to answer your question there, the financial signs. It might sound obvious, but certainly the impact it has on people's finances. So particularly for anyone affected or anyone sharing a bank account, unexplained transactions going out the bank account, not quite sure, or regularly losing money, not losing money, but not having money, or asking other people if they can borrow money because they're a bit short this month, and then maybe pressuring to get a loan out, take out extra credit and things like that seemingly seems to come out of nowhere. Like there's no other reason as to why that would be the case, why they would perhaps need to access that money. And then one of the biggest signs, and I would say this is probably more apparent as maybe there's a suspicion around gambling, but it's the lying, someone who's hiding their gambling. And it might just be lying about what they're doing with their time. Particularly somebody who, if there's an expectation, to provide for people, and they're hiding kind of not just the activity of gambling, but going away for a certain amount of time and not really explaining where they are. So it could be finishing work and going to a bookmaker's and then spending an extra half an hour there, but not letting people know. And that sent to people feeling let down. So it's quite a detailed answer to your question, but I think they're the key points: feeling withdrawn, changes in mood, sleeping problems, concerns around finances, and lying. I say they'd be the key things we'd be saying that people should look out for.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And you spoke earlier about the fact that your service is not just for perhaps the people who are absolutely directly affected, as in the gamblers themselves, but also family and loved ones. What would you say is the ratio of people who come to you because they're worried about another member of the family as against people who come forward to talk to you about their own worries and problems?
Yeah, again, a really good question, Hazel. I think I'd have to check the exact statistics that we've got at present. But one thing I will say is that in terms of a split, we know that 84% of the people that call the helpline around somebody else's gambling are women who tend to be affected others. And 70% of gamblers contact the helpline, for themselves are male.
Right.
I would say we certainly get more people accessing the helpline, but also kind of we have a direct referral route into our service, that isn't just from the helpline, through our website and our phone number. And more often than not, we get people who are ringing who are an affected other to try and get somebody else support, not necessarily aware that we can support them too.
Yeah.
So it's, one of the key things we say to people if they're calling because they're worried about somebody else is that we're here to support you as well. And one of the reasons I would say, perhaps more anecdotally, why we maybe don't see as many people come forward as an affected other is because I touched on earlier about isolation and loneliness and being withdrawn. And that really is the case for people who are affected by gambling, because because the focus is on getting that person who's gambling help. They're the most in the perception can be that they are the most important person. They're the person that needs to speak to somebody. Oh, I'm okay as long as, my partner, my son, my daughter can get support. And we're really trying to get that message out there that no, these people really need support as well. And that support consists of not how can we get that person to stop gambling or how can we get that person into treatment. It's support for you as an affected other. How are you? How is your, what is your well-being at this moment in time? What's your financial situation? How are you being impacted on it? It's very much the focus is on the individual, not as a kind of trying to get someone into treatment through the back door sort of thing. So I would say, as I say, one of the reasons why maybe we don't see as many affected others is because, they feel like they're not the person that needs to speak to somebody, or they're not the person that needs support. And often, again, through things like guilt, shame, stigma, there can be a reluctance even to speak to family members or friends because it's perhaps embarrassing or you're not sure what the reaction is going to be. So again, we'd always encourage people to speak to us because, we have a non-judgmental approach and we know how to support people and how to get affected others, any extra support that they may need from other services across Leeds.
Yeah, definitely. And I did read on your website that there's been a 6% increase in women accessing gambling support. Has that been over the last year or so?
Yeah, over the last couple of years. Interestingly, more men than women do come forward in the Leeds area to seek support for their gambling. But we do have, compared to the national average is around 28% of people accessing support for gambling are women. But in Leeds, it's around 32%. So we do have a slightly higher than average number of women accessing support for gambling, both as a gambler and as an affected other. And again, it's going to be a similar thing to what I've just said thematically in terms of shame and stigma and things like that. That problematic gambling, I think there's this perception, this stereotype that it's a male issue. Again, you look at sports betting or going into a bookmakers and things like that. There's a perception that it's mainly a male activity. But we know that, anecdotally, and when you look at certain research, there's a much more even split in terms of male to female gambling. But again, because of that perhaps shame or that feeling of stigma, there can be a reluctance maybe for some people to come forward, and particularly for things, as we touched on earlier, if it's not even seen as gambling either. So it might be spending a bit too much money on a phone app or the lottery, scratch cards, things like that, which might be a reason why people don't necessarily come forward. As we look into like the statistics or the numbers of people coming forward, you look at that to measure kind of your outcomes and measure the impact that you're having. But the other question we always need to ask is, who aren't we speaking to? Who isn't filling out these surveys or getting, who aren't we able to get this data from? Mm-hmm. There's probably more we know we need to do in order to reach people who feel that perhaps they don't have a voice or don't that support isn't available for them. And the key message is that it is available to everybody, because problematic gambling or gambling addiction doesn't necessarily discriminate in that it can affect anybody. Obviously, there's certain groups who are affected more. We know that. Yeah. But the issue of gambling and gambling addiction and how it can take hold doesn't necessarily discriminate based on who you are.
Yeah, and I imagine it's very difficult, and there will be a myriad of reasons. But I wonder if part of the reason has been a higher amount of women struggling is because perhaps traditionally the places for betting were more male oriented. So, just the gambling shops that you get on high streets, sort of horse racing, things like that. It was all very male oriented, whereas now bingo's been about for years and years anyway, but it's become so huge. And then of course you get lots of those gambling apps that you see adverts on TV for all the time, and they're very much directed at women because of the look and the people in the adverts. And also they kind of couch it as, but it's also like a social media, and it's, you can chat to people, and very much aimed, I feel, more at the market of females. Do you think that's a thing?
Definitely, yeah, I completely agree with you, Hazel. I think it's as with any kind of advertising or anything like this, it's looking at when are those adverts being displayed. Maybe it's a bit more kind of during perhaps more daytime TV and things like that, and kind of how it's presented in certain situations and very much targeted to that audience. I'd completely agree with what you said there. And then again, touching on some of the things we mentioned before, if things like COVID has impacted on individuals, if there are, say, more women staying at home, it's that sense of, it helps with boredom. It gives you something to do. It gives that sense of excitement. Or if anybody's quite isolated, we've had a few cases where people are living on their own, and I can think of female clients we've had who feel a bit more isolated and are living on their own, and they tend to be gambling more, kind of as something to do, something to give a bit more excitement, which it will do. That's how it's designed. But when it tips into that always continuing to spend so much money and so much time on these apps that it's causing further isolation, causing further withdrawal, that's when we really worry, and we try to do as much as we can. I will say, GamCare as an organisation, nationally, we do have a what we call a women's programme, and one of their key remits is to speak to lots of services that support women directly, in order to raise the profile of gambling harm and how trying to improve access to support for females who are gambling.
Yeah. And how did you get involved in this particular line of work, Bryn? Is this something that you've always been interested in, or has it sort of developed, into this role?
Yeah, so I think it really started when I was at university. So I did sociology in Sheffield, and we had some modules there on, kind of things that impact on the well-beings of society, and obviously addiction was part of that. And as part of that, we went to local services supporting people, and predominantly like drug treatment services. So in 2009, I joined a charity that helps support individuals with drug and alcohol use. And then, as I said earlier, that moved into supporting young people. And then 2015 is when I moved to Leeds, and I worked with the substance misuse service here, and just increased my knowledge really, and just really saw obviously the impact that it can have on individuals, but the impact it can have on families, on those affected by those that are engaging in that addictive behaviour. And then in 2019, I joined GamCare because I felt there was a really exciting opportunity to set up a service that would help manage a problem that not very many people are perhaps sure what to do about. Everybody knows that gambling is a thing and that gambling addiction can be a thing. But in terms of getting support to people and the nuances and the differences with gambling compared to, say, drug or alcohol treatment, making sure it was key that we knew what they were, and putting the steps in place to do what we could to alleviate those concerns. That really excited me, and I thought it was really good. I'm really proud that Leeds was a city that was chosen as one of the first cities to offer a service like this.
Oh, brilliant. Well, we're very grateful for your help. And you said that you moved to Leeds in 2015, which means that you are fully qualified to answer the 3 questions that I ask every guest.
Yep.
The first one being, what would you say, Bryn, is something that is great about the city of Leeds?
So I was thinking a lot about this question, and I would probably go back to when I did the work with young people in my old job, because that role inevitably meant, we would do a lot of outreach type works. So I would go to lots of different schools across the city, do lots of home visits, and it would mean visiting all the different areas.
Yeah.
So one of the things I used to really love about that, and kind of ties into the answer to this question, is just how there's all these different areas of Leeds and how they have their own kind of identity.
Yeah.
So, I could be working in Morley, where I live, and then be doing work over in, I don't know, Hare Hills, and then work perhaps in Unwoodley or in Headingley. And each area would have its own sense of identity, and I know you'd kind of almost, as you're driving from one area to the other, you get that feeling of where you're going. And I used to really love that, and that sense of identity, whilst at the same time, just kind of the general openness that people had, particularly around the work that we did. When I've worked in other areas, there's always going to be a reluctance to talk about addictive behaviours. Mm-hmm. But I think just that openness that people, whether it was a school like letting us in and making it clear that we were welcome, or even going into people's houses. My job was to often go into people's houses. You didn't get much more private than that. But most, if not all, people were just so, this attitude of kind of wanting to welcome me in, and let me be someone that is there, to offer that support that I was there for. I was always touched by that, and always thought it was just so noticeably different from other areas that I've worked, where there was a air of perhaps skepticism or reluctance or suspicion. It was really noticeable, the difference from when I moved to Leeds. And now, again, even in the work I'm doing now, I predominantly work with other services, but it's still that same attitude, that same openness, that same willingness to perhaps talk about, get into the grey areas, talk about things that people maybe don't feel that comfortable talking about. I think that's a real key strength and a key quality, and it allows between services so much open discourse, and working with services, perhaps with the council or charity services, or even private services that we work with, just the willingness to kind of share and be open and work together to work towards a common goal. I think that's one thing that really struck me about working in Leeds, perhaps compared to other places.
Oh, that's a lovely answer. And if you had to choose something that you think is not so great about the city, what would you go for?
So again, I thought a lot about this question, and I think tying into what we do, I don't know, it feels a bit unfair to say it's not so great about the city, but one of the key reasons this service was set up in Leeds was because there was a research project done by Leeds Beckett University into the prevalence of problem gambling. Right. And it was identified that it was quite a bit higher than the national average, and the research showed that there was around 30,000 people who were at risk of an issue with gambling, and potentially 10,000 people who might have a significant concerns around gambling. So again, I wouldn't say it's a problem with the city per se, but it's certainly something that I think is, it's bad that they were the figures, but I think it's good that very quickly we've done something about it in terms of getting the service set up. The only other thing I mentioned, and I apologize, I don't know if many other people mention this, but things like access around the city in terms of transport or getting to places.
Yeah, that's a very, very popular answer.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. But the reason I mention it is because I think that's why we want to try and get out into various locations across the city as best we can. It's why we want to do that community engagement, because although it's great we have a space in the city centre, sometimes that can be a bit off-putting or alienating for people, or they might want to access remote support even though they might want face-to-face, because if it's not that easy to get into the city centre or to our site in Middleton or Hare Hills, the last thing we want to do is put barriers. So, if there was a bit better access around the city from a transport perspective, I think that would be good.
I think that's what we're all wishing for, yeah.
Support. Yeah, certainly, yeah. But yeah, from that specific perspective, it's in terms of there's the issue, but what do we want to do about it? We want to make sure we can get out to as many locations across the city to offer people that chance to access support, or even just information. They don't have to come in for support, just an opportunity to talk to somebody about gambling in general, so we can impart some advice and ways to keep safe.
Yeah, definitely. And if you met somebody who had been a resident of Leeds for a very long time, would you be able to tell them about something that you would consider to be a hidden gem that they might never have heard of?
So, yeah, I would. I mean, I'm obviously a bit biased, but I live in Morley, and over the last couple of years or so, Morley's done a lot of work to, in terms of, we've got an area called Morley Bottoms, which is and it's turned it into like a plaza type area. It used to be like a T-junction at the bottom of the hill on the high street.
Yeah.
But now they've reduced access for cars, and they've kind of paved it all out. And I'd say there's about maybe half a dozen of bars and like little street food restaurants and things like that, hairdressers, things like that are there. And as the weather gets nicer, it's such a nice space to sit, just enjoy the sunshine and, enjoy some food, enjoy some drinks. So I definitely recommend, Morley, to perhaps contradict what I just said, you can get to it quite easily from the train, from the city centre. And it's just nice. And like the vibe there is really relaxed and really cool. They've got, each of the bars, they're quite happy if you sit outside one bar to get drinks or food from another bar. They're not particular about that sort of thing. They just want to make that area and that space work and make it popular. So I would say something more local to me, that would be a bit of a hidden gem.
Oh, excellent. I mean, I have been to Morley quite a few times, and it is a lovely place to visit. But no, I didn't know about that. So that will be going on my list, Bryn.
Good stuff.
And what will you be doing with the rest of your day today?
So I've got a friend, funnily enough, you'd think I planned all these answers. I've got a friend coming over from Manchester later who's coming to stay. And then tomorrow we are going to go to Morley Bottoms, and I'm going to show him the sights. So the rest of the day is probably going to, after I finish work, probably spend a bit of time tidying the house and then waiting for him to come over.
Yeah, tidy up your house, ready to mess it up again. That's what I always do.
That's exactly it.
Well, thank you so very much for coming along to speak to me. I will put lots of links in the podcast notes so that people can access all of the services that you provide.
Yeah, please do. One thing I'll just lastly say, Hazel, is just I've talked a lot about harm reduction. For anybody listening and they're perhaps, are worried about I've got some concerns around their gambling but maybe don't immediately want to access support, please do check out our website or the GamCare website, because we've got links to lots of self-exclusion or self-blocking apps and websites that can really help limit the access that people have to gambling, particularly online. They can be really helpful, and people have found them really effective in the short term. So I would definitely recommend anybody listening that might have not necessarily concern or think they've got a problem, but just want to limit it. I would definitely check out the Talk, Ban, Stop campaign that GamCare run. Is a great source of information for a lot of that.
Well, that's a great bit of advice to end on. Thank you so much, Bryn, and have a lovely weekend with your friend.
And you. Thank you, Hazel. Cheers.
As usual, there are links in the podcast notes to the resources that Bryn has told us about. The featured track this episode is Glimmer, which is a very soothing track and it's rather beautiful, and it's by Leeds band Precept. I hope you enjoy it.